This is Paul Greene, who is the BSBI Ireland Officer and Vice County Recorder for County Wexford, and is currently writing a Flora of Wexford. Paul also jointly published the Atlas Flora of Somerset in 1997 with his brother Ian and Geraldine Crouch, and published the Flora of County Waterford in 2008. And today he's going to explain how to identify the 3 Whitlow-grass species that occur in Britain and Ireland. So if you've got any specimens to hand yourself, you're welcome to have a go at looking them when we're joining the session with Paul today. So I'll hand you over to Paul.
So as Sarah said, I'm Paul Greene, the BSBI Ireland Officer, and I'm going to give you a guide to identifying the 3 Erophila Whitlow grasses found in Britain and Ireland. And I say from the very start, they are not easy. They're a lot more difficult to identify than the books would like to suggest. I've put this picture in of the car park at Dunbrody Abbey in County Wexford. It shows a nice large patch of Whitlow grass here in the car park, and that's quite a typical habitat. Nice gravelly, well-drained ground. So as I said, there's 3 species, nice and easy. This really couldn't be further from the truth. And they're based on their chromosome numbers. And what I've been finding, I've been looking at the flowers, and the books say they're self-pollinated, and this is obviously very true, because I've noticed the bees would drop down to the flowers, take a look, then fly off again, and I haven't seen any other insects visiting the flowers at all. So we've got 3 species, common Whitlow grass, Erophila verna, and you see in that picture down in the bottom left-hand corner, it has sort of narrow green leaves and very hairy, and sort of hairy stems. That's what I call a typical looking verna. And then in the middle, the hairy Whitlow grass, Erophila muscula, and that always has much broader leaves than the other 2, and usually hairy. And I say usually because none of these Whitlow grasses have ever read the textbooks. And then glabrous Whitlow grass, Erophila glabroscens, normally doesn't have any leaves, not leaves, hairs, as the name suggests. So before I get into identifying the 3 species, this is what the books sort of like to ask you or tell you about this. Sort of the hairs on the leaves and the stems. Are they simple? And that's just a straight hair. Are they forked? They look like a letter Y. Or are they stellate, what looks like a little star? And are they beyond the first pedicel? And the books seem to say height. Some say up to 25 centimetres, what seems rather tall, because usually they're only sort of 4 to 6 centimetres tall, and this year where it's been so dry, lots of populations haven't made 2 centimetres and probably have died in this heat this week. So petals, how bifid they are, that's the notch, what divides down through the middle of the petal, and that's a really good feature for doing your Whitlow grasses, and you should never really identify them until they start flowering. And flowering time, lots of books seem to suggest May, up to May, sort of like February to May, but I find they seem to flower in January or even December. So they're one of the good species for the New Year plant hunt. And seeds, the books like to talk about the length of the seeds, and they are really difficult because they're quite tiny. And then the leaf shape and the colour, and again, that is very, very variable. So it works with hairy Whitlow grass, but it doesn't work with the other 2 very well. And then the leaf stalk, the length compared to the leaf blade, and that's even more unreliable because they are so variable. And then number of leaves in the rosette. Tiny plants may only have 4 to 6 leaves, and large plants 30 or even 50 leaves. And then they ask you about the teeth on the leaves, on the leaf blade. And again, that could be no teeth or 2 or 3. And one of the things I've been finding is we have lots of populations in at least in Wexford, and I've seen it in France as well this year, where all the leaves and stems and flower buds are pink, reddish or purplish, and none of the books mention that. And also none of the books seem to apply that plants have grey or black stems. If they give the colour, they always say green. So I've got here, we're going to start with Erophila verna, the common Whitlow grass. And I put that nice picture with the nice green leaves there on the left. That's what I call a typical looking verna, and that's what I call average. We have very hairy leaves in the centre, And with age, all the hairs start dropping off, and you see this leaf, what's wet, it's lost most of the hairs, and up here it's lost most of the hairs. And then they talk about the length of the stalk. You see that's got quite a long stalk on that leaf. But as you can see, some of those leaves in that rosette got no stalk, and others got quite a lot of stalks. And you find some populations, they stay hairy all the way through their life, and others will lose all the hairs, like the picture on the right, that little red plant there. That one's lost all its hairs, and that all up through the east coast of Ireland. That seems quite a common form of common whitlow-grass. So hairs on the stems. So that's really important character. You can see my little white arrow moving. See on Erophila, the hairs on the young stem, they're really hairy, it's just covered in hairs all the way up. With age, they're a bit like men, they lose the hairs, and you see they've lost all the hairs up here on the top of the stem and up here. And quite often, by the time they finish flowering, the hairs will have completely dropped off every stem, and there won't be a hair left. They tend to stay on the leaves a bit better. So I put this one in because if you have a well-behaved common whitlow-grass, the hairs will stay below that white arrow. They'll only go up to the first petal, so they won't go beyond that stage. But what I've been finding, I've looked at what feels like millions of plants this year, and occasionally you get the odd Erophila that does have hairs where it shouldn't do, but they're like 1 in 1,000. So petals, this is a very important feature of the plants, and it's best to go on a sunny day so they're nice and open, like you see in those pictures there. And you find in common whitlow-grass, the petals are bifid for 3/4 of their length. So you can see where this white arrow is pointing. That goes all the way down. So that's a really good sign that you've got common whitlow-grass. And what I've been finding, the petals are generally about just over twice as long as the sepals, and that's quite a good feature. But if on a day when the flowers aren't open, I find it really hard to measure the depth of that bifid. So glabrous whitlow-grass, Erophila glabrescens. Now I've put 3 extreme forms of it here. The plant on the right only has 1 hair on one of the teeth. The picture in the middle from Scotland doesn't have a single hair anywhere. And then the plant on the left is what I call more typical. It's got a few hairs on the margins and on the very tip of the leaves. And the leaves always have this sort of shiny look. So I always find that's a good indication. If you've got nice shiny leaves, you've probably got glabrous whitlow-grass, but both the other species can occasionally have shiny leaves. And then again, they talk about the stalk ratio to the leaf base. You see a nice long stalk there, and the leaf blade. And the books sort of say 1.5 to 2.5 times longer for the leaf stalk compared to the blade. But that varies so much. As you can see in that rosette on the left, the leaf stalks are all lengths. And then the picture from Scotland has exceptionally long leaf blades and on the long stalks and short blades. And the picture on the right, because the leaves are narrow, you don't really know where the blade and the stalk start and stop. So it does sort of make it difficult at times. And even hairy whitlow-grass, no glabrous whitlow-grass, I mean, you can see the leaves here are really hairy. So even glabrous whitlow-grass can be quite hairy. So when you're trying to identify them, you've got to really look at more than one feature on each plant. And I put this one in because this was a whole population where there's about 1,000 plants, and every plant had these red, purplish leaves with a hint of green. And the plant down in the bottom left-hand corner, there's lots has purple buds, and even the sepals are purple. The petals almost had a hint of pink to them. And if you're a real beginner, I find this is quite misleading because the books only say they have green leaves or greyish green. So you could think you've got another species. So petals in glabrous whitlow-grass. So you can see that petal what's fallen off with the white arrow pointing at it. That's only bifid for well under halfway, and that's a really good example. And then you can see again where the 2 red arrows are, they're pointing to the bifid notch, and that's again stops well before it reaches halfway. And the petals tend to be only twice as long as the sepals. So again, the ratio of petal to sepals works reasonably well. And if you find it difficult deciding how deeply that bifid notch is, I find if you put your hand under a stem of the Whitlow-grass and give it a little tap, the petals just drop out. They seem to fall out quite easily and just pull them out of the flowers. So hairs on the stems for glabrous Whitlow-grass. If you have a really well-behaved plant, there won't be any hairs on the stems like where the blue arrow is pointing, and they never go beyond that first pedicel. And then you see where the two white arrows are pointing. There's a few hairs right down at the base, and they'll only be right down near the base of the stem. They never go much higher up. And again, they normally fall off with age. And when Jim McIntosh asked would I do this talk back in January, I thought I'm going to have to go and do some homework on hairy Whitlow-grass, because I'd only ever seen that once in North Wales on the Great Hall with Wendy McCarthy. So I took a trip up to Dublin to have a look at this known site. And as you can see, I've done a lot of praying. You get some funny remarks from members of the public, and they usually point out all the daisies are more interesting, or they tell me they're going to get the weed killer out and kill them all. So here we've got two really nice hairy Whitlow-grasses showing how variable they can be. The plant on the left, nice green leaves. Most of them are reasonably hairy. And you can just about notice the odd stalk, but the stalks are really short. And then the plant on the right has those grey-green leaves. And that's when if you're hearing a Whitlow-grass out in the books, they quite often say leaves grey-green to send you to hairy Whitlow-grass, or green to send you for the others. And the greyness has nothing to do with the hairs, it's to do with the pigments from the leaves. And you can see on both of these plants, the young leaves in the centre are really hairy. And on that green one, you see the buds are very, very hairy, much more so on the other two species. And you can see on this grey one, the buds are really nice and pink, rosy pink. I find on especially the grey leaf plants, they can have really rosy colour sepals, and that can be another little indication to give you a clue that you get to hairy Whitlow-grass. So hairs on stems. You can see on this picture plant on the right, the hairs go all the way up the stem where my little white arrow is moving. And if you've got one like that, you know you've got hairy Whitlow-grass, because that's the only one that has hairs all the way up the stem. And even on this first pedicel, you just see a few hairs. And then the plant on the left of that nice black stem, the hairs go all the way up the stem, and all four pedicels have hairs. So that's a really good example. But I've been finding again, when you go visit sites, some populations, all the hairs drop off even quite early on. So you've got to look at quite a few plants in the population to see if you can find those hairs high enough up the stem. And Alan Leslie suggested to me that the hairs are shorter on hairy Whitlow-grass compared to the other two species. And I've had a good look with my hand lens, and they definitely are shorter, but they're a bit too small to sort of measure. But that could be a good field character. Has it got shorter hairs? So petals on hairy Whitlow-grass, they're only bifid for a maximum of halfway. And you see where that blue arrow is pointing, it definitely stops before it gets halfway. And the petals are shorter and broader than the other two species. So it gives the flowers a more of a chunky look. It's hard to explain, but it gives it a jizz, or you can sort of pick them out in the field a bit easier. And the petals tend to be less than twice as long as the sepal. So again, the ratio of petal to sepal can work quite well. And I've just put a note there so you can see the stems on this one. There's no hairs on the stem or on the pedicels. So it just shows that hairy Whitlow-grass also loses its hairs. So measuring seeds. It's not easy, because if you're like me, you don't own a microscope, but you can buy one of the lenses I put there in the corner. You can get those from Summerfield Books. And for hairy Whitlow-grass, that has the smallest seeds, and the books sort of say 0.3 to 0.5. And in the picture there, the average is 0.4, and there's one or two smaller seeds. And then Glaber's Whitlow-grass has the larger seeds, and most books say 0.7 to 0.8 millimeters. And the average in that picture is 7, and there's two slightly smaller seeds. And then common Whitlow-grass has a bigger range, 0.5 to 0.8. And then that picture there, about 6 millimeters, or 0.6, I should say. And what I've been finding, you've got to measure more on one pod and from more on one plant, because even hairy Whitlow-grass can occasionally have one or two seeds at 0.6, or bigger range than any of the books give. And what can make it difficult when you're looking at Whitlow-grass is then growing mixed populations. So I've seen lots of common Whitlow-grass and hairy Whitlow-grass growing together this year. And occasionally I've seen common Whitlow-grass and Glaber's Whitlow-grass. And both these cantifloras, I don't own all the cantifloras, both these two give one site each where all three species grow together. And I looked into the BSBI database, and I based this pie chart on records since 1987, because that was the first year there was a field guide published that included all three species. And it does seem surprising that all the records, only 41% were named as Erophila verna, because that's the easy option, just don't bother to work out which one you've got. So to find 53% were named as Erophila verna, it's pretty good going. And then only 5% for poor Glaber's Whitlow-grass, and hairy Whitlow-grass just gets in there with 1%. So I put some distribution maps, and these were taken from the BSBI database. And the map on the left shows all the hectares where there's a record for at least one record for Whitlow-grass. And you see it's very common up through England. It's only really rare in the west of Scotland and large parts of Ireland. And then we look at the map on the right for common Whitlow-grass. There's still lots of white gaps in it. And I would imagine those two maps should really match each other. They should be identical, because most sites have a Whitlow-grass, usually has a Erophila verna. And then when you look at these two maps, Glaber's Whitlow-grass really does show recorder biased. You can see me down in the southeast of Ireland, where there's lots of dots. Anglesey in North Wales stands out quite well. And sort of Inverness up in Scotland stands out quite well, for example. So that's probably under-recorded or over-recorded, depending how you want to look at it. And then hairy Whitlow-grass on the right really shows the opposite trend. There's a lot less modern records compared to the old records, and that's possibly just overlooked, because that's the most distinctive species of the three, and that's the one I feel you should better ID when you're out in the field. And I've been to lots of sites this year. We found it new for County Wexford. It grows all over the golf course at Rosslare, and there's thousands and thousands of plants of it. So it's amazing we actually missed it. And in areas it just turns the golf course white. So I took a look at the altitude limits, because I went up a mountain just to get a photo of what's coming up shortly. And you can get a little booklet from the BSBI, list all the species, or you go to the website and get the same information. And they give Erophila verna for 845 metres in Great Dunfermline in County Durham. And there's no mention of Glaber's Whitlow-grass or hairy Whitlow-grass. They just don't get a say in it, which seems such a shame. So this is the mountain I went up 2 weeks ago. And I presume this is the highest site in Ireland, and this is Mount Leinster in County Carlow. And here we have Erophila glabrescens. It grows in the grassy area, as you can see around that TV mast. And then any man-made slight habitat with disturbed areas it grows. And it probably came in with the material they put up to build the road back in the 1950s when the first TV mast went up. And here it actually grows with fir club moss in one or two places. And then it grows not far from stiff sedge and Wilson's filbert fern. And that seems two extremely unlikely, or three unlikely species to occur with a Whitlow-grass. Well, I've never seen a Whitlow-grass in the mountain elsewhere, so I take it this is just a unique site. So habitats. It's quite a wide variety of habitats, far more than I've got in these pictures here. And they like to be grown in really well-drained soil, because I find the ones I've taken home to grow, if I overwater them, they seem to die quite easy. So sand dunes on the coast is a very common habitat. Limestone grassland if you're in the right parts of Britain or Ireland. Granite outcrops, I've seen both hairy Whitlow-grass and Glaber's Whitlow-grass growing on. And then golf courses, mown lawns, playing fields, especially coastal ones, they can be really common. Field gateways seems unlikely habitat for a Whitlow-grass, but it seems to be turning up in those quite a lot. And churchyards, if you go to the churchyards, I've been finding 1 out of every 3 has Whitlow-grass, especially the ones with lots of gravel, and cemeteries tend to be even better. And I've had lots of people say, oh, Paul, the street trees are really good for Whitlow-grass. So if you live in an urban area, that's a good spot to look for a Whitlow-grass around the base of the trees. And then if you've got the right type of pavements, it can be very common all along the pavements. And I don't know if it's just an Irish habitat, but we have lots of gravelly roadsides, and Whitlow-grass seems to be getting more and more common in that habitat. And then country lanes, it seems an unlikely place to find a Whitlow-grass. Both Glaber's Whitlow-grass and common Whitlow-grass quite often grows down the centre of narrow country lanes. And then old walls. Old walls, it can be really common in that picture on the bottom right hand corner. Whitlow-grass grow the whole length of that wall. And what surprised me, that was a new site this year in County Wexford. So I'm not going to read this table, it's just put here to give you a guide. But I'm just going to mention the stellate hairs under common Whitlow-grass, because all the books seem to imply that stellate hairs are common on Whitlow-grass, on hairy Whitlow-grass, I mean. And I've looked at lots of hairy Whitlow-grasses this year, and I've only found 1 plant with 2 stellate hairs. I couldn't find any of the other plants I looked at. And a friend took some home and looked under a microscope. And again, he said, they are there, but there's only 1 or 2 on most plants, so they're definitely not easy to find. I put this in for some further reading, because Plant Crib has quite a good description for the Whitlow-grasses, and it gives sort of an account how we got to the 3 species we have nowadays. And then if you want some really nice photos, the Cambridge Wildflower blog has some stunning photos and quite a lot of extra information, just little guides for help with ID. Just like to say thank you for listening, and you're welcome to send me photos at that email address at the top. I'd just like to thank all those people there for help with ID, help with IT, give me useful tips and accompany me in the field.